My son sat down at my kitchen table on a Tuesday evening in November and told me that unless I cleared his wife's $340,000 business debt by the end of the month, I should start making arrangements to live somewhere else. He said it the way people announce something they consider already settled, not a question, not a request. He set his coffee mug down, my mug, in my kitchen, and looked at me the way you look at a problem you're tired of carrying around. My daughter-in-law stood near the window with her arms folded. She had positioned herself on the far side of the room, as though she wanted to observe from a comfortable distance. She said, almost brightly, "It's not like you're using the equity for anything. The house just sits there." I had been making soup when they walked in. I remember the ladle in my hand, the smell of split pea and ham. Murray's recipe, the one he made every November when the cold came back to stay. I set the ladle on the counter and turned around. "This is my house," I said. My daughter-in-law smiled. It was the smile she used when she had already decided an argument was finished. "And it will still be your house," she said. "We'll be living in it. You'll have a room." A room. In the house where I had raised my son, where my husband had built every shelf by hand, where I had shoveled the driveway alone through 4 Ontario winters since Murray died. A room. My son said, "Mom, don't make this complicated. Her business failed. We need help." That's what family does. I turned that word over for a moment. Family. I had been hearing it applied to a great many things over the past several years. To requests I could not refuse, to decisions made without consulting me, to a version of love that seemed to involve a great deal of obligation and very little in return. That evening, standing in my own kitchen with my soup cooling on the stove, I heard it and felt nothing warm in it at all. I did not become someone my son could speak to that way overnight. The distance between us had been built slowly, the way damage usually is, not in a single blow, but in a long, patient sequence of smaller ones, each one almost reasonable on its own. The first real crack appeared when he was 25. He came to me with a plan, a wholesale import business, and he needed $20,000 to get it off the ground. He arrived the way he always did when he wanted something, with energy and certainty, and the comfortable assumption that I would agree, because that was what mothers did. I asked to see the business plan. He didn't have one written down, he told me, but he had it all worked out in his head. I said I loved him, but I would not hand over money for something that existed only in someone's imagination. He told me I never believed in him. He said it with a particular bitterness, the kind you use when you intend a thing to be remembered. The business never materialized. 2 friends who did put money in lost it inside a year. He never mentioned that, and he never apologized for what he had said to me. My daughter-in-law arrived in our lives a few years after that. She was sharp and magnetic and very confident in her opinions, which she delivered as though they were gentle corrections to errors you hadn't yet realized you'd made. My son looked at her as though she were the answer to something he had been asking for a long time. She started a lifestyle product company. Candles, skincare, curated subscription boxes shipped across Canada. It grew quickly, and then too quickly. She borrowed against the growth before the revenue could support it. She brought on staff prematurely. She pushed into the American market without fully accounting for the tariff and customs landscape. When it collapsed, she owed $340,000 spread across 4 creditors. None of this was shared with me until that Tuesday in November when my son sat at my kitchen table and informed me, calmly, that it had become my problem to solve. 3 days later came the dinner. My daughter-in-law had invited her younger sister and a couple they socialized with, people I barely knew. The table was set properly, cloth napkins folded into neat triangles, candles lit. I noticed a folder of documents sitting near my son's plate. He had not tried to conceal it. Her sister made steady, sympathetic eye contact with me throughout the meal, the way people do when they've been told to appear neutral. When the dishes were cleared, my son opened the folder and walked through what he called a straightforward property arrangement. Temporary, he said, for tax sufficiency. My daughter-in-law said it was the only sensible solution and that any reasonable person would see that immediately. Her sister nodded. The couple they'd invited nodded. The room had been assembled to nod. If you really loved your son, my daughter-in-law said, this wouldn't feel like a sacrifice. It would feel like what it is, a mother doing what mothers do. I sat with my hands folded in my lap and said very little. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I had learned over 67 years that some rooms are not interested in what you actually think. They are interested only in your compliance. Anything else gets reframed as selfishness. My son looked at me with an expression I recognized. Not quite cruelty, but something that sits just beside it. Impatience. I was becoming an item on a list that was taking too long to resolve. Sleep on it, he said. We'll sort it out tomorrow. I nodded once. If you've stayed with this story this long, you may already know the particular ache of watching someone you love become a stranger. If these words have touched something in you, please share them with someone who needs to hear them. Here at Family Tales, we believe every mother's truth deserves to be spoken aloud. Your support keeps these voices carrying. Thank you. Now, please keep listening. The next morning, my son arrived, before I had finished my first cup of tea. He was dressed for work. He set the papers on the table and placed an uncapped pen beside them with a small, decisive click. Just the one signature, he said, bottom of page 3. My daughter-in-law appeared in the doorway a few minutes. Behind him, positioned in that particular way that made the hall feel less accessible. I picked up the documents and read slowly. The language was careful and calibrated. Phrases like administrative convenience and estate planning arrangement and beneficial transfer of management authority. It was the kind of language that sounds harmless and means something else entirely. Murray had worked in contracts management for 31 years. He used to tell me that the most dangerous documents are always the ones written to sound simple. I'd like to have someone look at this first, I said. My son put both hands flat on the table. Mom, there's nothing to look at. It's standard. Stop stalling. My daughter-in-law stepped fully into the kitchen. She said they had been patient. She said they had been living in this house and contributing, and that this was the least I could do, given everything. She said it with the tone of someone reading from an invoice that was long past due. I told them I needed until the following day. My son took the papers back and said fine, but that I shouldn't think they hadn't looked into their options. He left it at that. He did not need to say more. 2 hours later, a white van pulled into the driveway. A man with a toolbox rang the bell. My daughter-in-law answered it. I came down the hall in time to hear her tell him I was confused sometimes, that I got things mixed up, that she was the one who'd called. She said it with a patient, apologetic smile that was designed to make me look diminished. The man glanced at me. I told him, quietly, that the house was in my name, that the land title had been registered to me for over 30 years, and that he was welcome to verify that through Ontario's land registry before proceeding. He looked at my daughter-in-law. He looked back at me. He collected his toolbox and left without touching the lock. My daughter-in-law watched the van pull out, said nothing, and spent the rest of the afternoon being loudly efficient in other rooms. That evening, she moved into the hall closet with a large garbage bag. "Reorganizing," she said. She pulled things from the upper shelf and sorted quickly, dropping items she considered unnecessary into the bag. I came out of my room when I heard the rustling. I stopped when I saw what she was holding. Murray's fishing cap. The old, faded green one he wore every single Saturday at Lake Erie from the time our son was small. 6 years old, maybe 7, right up until the summer before Murray got his diagnosis. Murray had a way of pulling it low over his eyes when the glare came off the water in the afternoon. He wore it the last time we went out on the lake as a family. I have a photograph from that day. We are all squinting into the sun, and my son is leaning against his father's shoulder, and we did not yet know that anything was ending. My daughter-in-law held the cap at arm's length. She turned it over once. She dropped it into the garbage bag. Something happened inside me in that moment that I have spent a good deal of time since trying to describe accurately. It was not only grief, though grief was certainly part of it. It was the understanding that she knew what that cap meant. She had spent 2 years in our home. She had heard the stories. She had dropped it anyway, not carelessly, not thoughtlessly. She had looked at it and made a decision. I walked across the hall and reached into the bag and took the cap out and held it. "That's clutter," she said. "That's my husband," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she shrugged and returned to the closet. My son came to stand in the doorway later that evening and said I was making things harder than they needed to be. That I was too attached to objects, that holding onto the past was the reason I couldn't see what was actually important. He said it gently. The way people deliver a verdict they consider generous. I went back to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed and held the fishing cap in both hands. I thought about Murray, about the way he used to say that the only meaningful response to someone who has already decided they are right is not argument. It is preparation. He had believed in that completely. He had spent the final years of his life acting on it quietly, without telling me all of it, because he knew I would tell him he worried too much. I opened the bottom drawer of my dresser. I took out the envelope he had given me with instructions not to open it unless I truly had to. It was time. If this story has reached you in a place that matters, if you've recognized someone you love in these words, or recognized yourself, then you already understand why these stories need to be spoken out loud. At Family Tales, we are here for the women who stayed quiet too long and the people who are still listening for them. Please subscribe if you believe their voices deserve to travel further. And stay with me. There is more. I left the house at midnight. The November streets were empty, the streetlights giving the frost on the pavement a soft orange color that I remember finding almost beautiful. I had packed one bag with care. I took the envelope, the fishing cap, and the photograph of Murray and me from the summer we bought the house. 1991, the two of us standing in the driveway, squinting into a bright July sky. I left a note on the kitchen table. 5 words, "Do not try to reach me." I locked the door behind me and drove to a motel at the edge of town. I did not look back as I pulled out of the driveway. I had always thought leaving would tear something loose inside me. It didn't. By morning, my son had called 6 times. My daughter-in-law had sent several messages, the last of which said only, "Good, the house already feels lighter." I read them in the motel room, sitting by the window with a coffee from the small machine on the dresser. I did not reply. Murray's lawyer had been in the same modest office, on the same street for over 20 years. He stood up when I walked in, looked at me steadily, and said, "It happened." Not a question. We sat down and he brought out the trust agreement Murray had established in secret 7 years earlier. Murray had registered an inter vivos trust in Ontario with very specific provisions. The property could not be transferred, signed over, remortgaged, or placed under any third-party authority under any circumstances involving financial pressure or family coercion. If documented evidence emerged that such coercion had been attempted, ultimatums, interference with locks, forced signing demands, the property would transfer automatically to a provincial non-profit land trust dedicated to housing elderly women experiencing financial abuse. The clause required no court hearing. There was no mechanism for appeal. Murray had drafted it quietly, with precision, the year after my son first asked to have his name added to the deed. I laid my phone on the desk between us. The messages, the voicemails, the email my daughter-in-law had sent to the locksmith, which had been copied in error to the household email account that we had never gotten around to closing after Murray died. The lawyer read everything carefully. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Your husband was a thorough man." The formal notices went out that afternoon. My son called at 7 in the evening. His voice sounded different. Something that had sat firmly inside it for years had come loose. He said there must have been a misunderstanding. He said the lawyer must have read the documents wrong. He said Murray would never have done something like this. He said it wasn't fair. I waited until he was finished. Then I said, "Murray did this because he loved me, and because he understood certain things about you that you never knew he had noticed." My daughter-in-law sent a long, furious message in the days that followed. She wrote that I had set a trap, that I had pretended to be helpless in order to spring this on them when they were most exposed, that what I had done was a form of betrayal. I thought for a long time about what it meant to be accused of betrayal by the person who had stood in my hall and dropped my husband's fishing cap into a garbage bag. They lost the house within 10 days of the notices being served. They lost access to the contingency account Murray had maintained. They lost the structured investment portfolio he had established to support me, which was now managed exclusively by the trust and would no longer pass to my son under any amended terms. He would have inherited a portion of it eventually, in better circumstances. He would not, now. I signed a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment near the lake. My windows face east. In the mornings, the light comes in low and clean and falls across the table where I drink my coffee in the quiet. Murray's fishing cap sits on the shelf above the bookcase. I look at it every morning. Some days it makes me sad. Most days it makes me feel like I am still in very good company. I do not wish my son harm. I wish him the particular kind of clarity that arrives only when the stories we tell ourselves about who we are stop holding together. That reckoning is a painful thing, but it is the only honest way through. Justice, I have learned, is almost never loud. It does not arrive with confrontation or with speeches. It arrives in a quiet law office on a gray November afternoon, in documents prepared by a man who loved you carefully enough to plan for the worst, and who trusted that you would still be standing when it came. I am Ida. I did not raise my voice. I did not beg. I held on to a worn-out fishing cap in a dark hallway and understood finally that leaving with your dignity is not the same as losing. My husband knew that. He left me the proof. And it turns out that was more than enough.